evening. Welcome to Progressive Soup. My name is David Stevenson. Tonight we're going to talk about many, many decades of excellence at Wooster School. I believe about 80, 85 years now. And we have three wonderful guests. We have Karen Rolfini Beckenstein, we have Tim Golding, and we have Alex Zequeira, if I said that correctly.
That's correct. That's correct.
Okay. First of all, Tim, give us a little background in the history of Wooster School.
Well, Wooster was founded by an Episcopal minister who was associated with St. James here in Danbury, Reverend Aaron Coburn. And in the 20s, he believed that there should be a school for boys. And so about the mid-20s, he started a school for boys, and he also didn't believe that those boys shouldn't be part of education even if they didn't have the money to afford it. So Wooster opened with, I believe, 10 boys, and over the next 80 years, it's evolved from an all-boys boarding school associated with the Episcopal Church to now a school of 354 boys and girls, co-educational day, and here we are as part of your program tonight.
Wonderful. Karen and Alex are here to talk about diversity because this is one of the founding cornerstones of Wooster School. And I have to say that I have to throw in the little tidbit that both my daughters, Kimberly and Sarah, attended Wooster School, very much loved the school. It gave them a great springboard into college and into later life. But let's talk about diversity.
Sure. The National Association of Independent Schools defines diversity as race, ability, socioeconomic class, ethnicity, religion, age, gender, and sexual orientation. So it's a very broad group. I was also asked to talk a little bit about my own ethnicity and how I came to Wooster.
Yes, a wonderful story. Go ahead.
I am first-generation American. My mother is from Colombia and my father is from Italy. I grew in a very Hispanic household. I spent most of my childhood in Colombia and in Venezuela. I live in an interfaith house. My husband, Eric, is Jewish and I'm Catholic. And we affectionately call our son Harrison a cashew.
That's great.
So diversity is very important to us, and it's something that it's part of my identity and what I was looking for when I looked at Wooster, not only for myself but also for my child.
Alex, where did you come from, and how did you get to where you are now?
Well, I was born and raised in Miami, Florida, and first generation Cuban American. Both my parents came over in the early '60s to escape the Castro regime in Cuba. They came before my grandparents did. My grandparents came a few years after they arrived, and I went to a school that actually was founded in Cuba and moved to Miami in 1961. Jesuit school, Belen Jesuit, and went on to Holy Cross, and pretty much wanted to get involved with education when I was in college, and applied for a job and have been teaching now for 16 years, and I've been at Wooster for 2. And I think it's interesting, and I'm glad that Karen mentioned the NAIS definition of diversity, because I know that when I first arrived in New England, it was I was approached with the idea of diversity was basically it was a racial issue, and I think it's institutions like the NAIS and other independent organizations like Wooster School that really promote this more global view of diversity, which sets us apart, I think.
Certainly, diversity means many things. Tim, not to leave you out on your background, where are you from, and how did you get to where you are now?
Well, it's interesting. I grew up in Boston. My father was an Episcopal minister, and in fact was very much involved with ministry in Massachusetts until he moved to Washington, D.C. to take a parish there. I got started in independent school education in the Boston area. I then went to an all-boys Episcopal school in Washington that ultimately I learned later did have an affiliation with Wooster. And then after graduating from a Quaker college, I've spent 40 years in education, 5 different independent schools, and I've been the headmaster at Wooster for the last 3.
You mentioned independent as a designation for Wooster School. What separates the old concept of private school from what we speak of as independent school? Now, what is the difference between the two? Is there any such thing as a private school anymore? And what is an independent school made out of?
I'm glad that you've asked me the question about private school, and that is a definition that is still used, depending on the area of the country. Private and independent schools are the same thing. I choose to use the word independent because I think it's a better reflection of what we are. When you use private, it connotes exclusiveness, it connotes non-accessibility. And really what an independent school is a school that is devoid of public funding from the state or from the federal government. We're part of a national association of independent schools. There's an association here in Connecticut, which comprises some 97 schools. But the primary difference between an independent school and public education is that we have the ability to create our own curriculum, to hire faculty and teachers according to their strengths. We can create our own mission, our own philosophy, and we can set our own rules of behavior. We have a custom at Wooster that means that we want our students to take care of one another, to be tolerant of each other. We have a work program that allows them to maintain the school. This is unique, I think, to most independent schools. So in that sense, I think there is a lack of entitlement, and there's an opportunity for students to recognize the strengths and weaknesses of everybody.
So you have a lot of latitude that you wouldn't have otherwise for instance, in a public school.
We do. You know, when you consider the fact that there are roughly 1,200 schools in the country that are independent schools, some of them are within the National Association and some of them are without, we're probably educating close to 600,000 students nationwide in what we call the independent schools. Some of them are day schools, some of them are boarding. Wooster, as I told you, started out as a boarding school for boys, and now in the 70s to the 90s it morphed into a day school, which was coeducational, and we added a lower school in the 90s. So now we go from pre-kindergarten through 12th grades, and there are 354 students, roughly 50-50 co-ed in terms of boys and girls. But it's a wonderful experience to be part of. I came to Wooster not really knowing whether I wanted to run another school again. I'd run an independent school in Delaware for 19 years. But when I came across the bridge and started meeting the people and learning a little bit about the philosophy of Wooster, I'm here, and I'm in my third year, and Alex and Karen are both faculty members that I've hired, and I'm very proud of both of them.
So for students and their families who would consider Wooster School as an avenue to education, take us through a typical day, if there is such a thing.
Well, there is. We start school a little before 8 o'clock. We have a pretty varied curriculum. It's a rigorous curriculum. Virtually all of our students, our seniors, go off to higher education. I'm very proud of this particular senior class that have applied to higher education, in many cases early decision, early action. I was talking to our Director of College Guidance today, and 17 of the class are already in. Some very competitive schools. One of them has been accepted at Wharton. But they begin, and they begin with classes in 5 or 6 different disciplines. They're very involved with the arts and the athletics and the afternoon program, so it's a full day. We have chapel once a week for lower, middle, and upper school students. The interesting thing about our chapel is that we're not proselytizing the Episcopal religion. The fact is all faiths are recognized, and we do a very good job of making sure that all faiths are talked about so that there's a real understanding of the different traditions.
And what is that famous motto above the door of the chapel?
If you are a believer, pray, and if you're a non-believer, respect.
So that everyone has a place at the table, no matter where they are in terms of religion or non-religion, which is wonderful. Again, back back to the diversity, tell us about the language programs there, because I know, Karen, you're in charge of the Spanish program in the upper school. You and Alex talk about, if you'll tell me more about how language plays a part in that diversity.
Sure. Our school teaches, we teach Spanish, French. We have one semester of Arabic and one semester of Russian.
Interesting.
We also have Latin, and we have students that go from all the way AP to independent studies. So it's we really want our students to have a global knowledge and to be able to interact with others. As the director of diversity, I like to see that I come to the position with a legal background and also a background in education, and I see it as a way of opening the ability to talk about diversity and to also educate others to value and respect each other.
Now, Alex, how does the language aspect work into the cultural aspect?
Well, I think one of the things that Tim mentioned about being an independent school is that we really have the freedom to explore and to expand our curriculum. When I was hired 2 years ago, I was asked specifically, are there any courses, we'd like to get some more. I was a history major in college, but I've taught Spanish also for 16 years. And I was asked if I wanted to introduce a new elective into the history department. And so last year we introduced 2 Latin American history courses, semester-long courses for juniors and seniors. One was early Latin American history up until independence, and the other one was basically 20th century, 20th and 21st century Latin American history, contemporary. And we also this year, Wooster introduced an African American history class. And so this freedom allows us to bring these courses into the everyday life of our students and to expose them to some things that I didn't see until I was in college. And so I think that that's a huge advantage. We also have a very, very extensive and a long tradition, I think almost 40 years of a travel abroad, a study abroad program. One of my students last year is actually studying along with another student in Valencia, Spain, and they spend the year with a host family, going to school full-time in a Spanish independent school in Valencia, and we also have another student who's studying in France. And so this idea of opening, that education isn't found simply in a classroom. It's really education outside of our campus, outside of our walls. And last year we had a number of different events, some through the Office of Multicultural Affairs and some through the classes, to really open up new interests and topics within the school community. We had a Latin American history conference and things like that. So it's great to have that opportunity to really take your passions and be able to expose students who are really thirsty for this knowledge.
One of the things that Alex has mentioned, the year abroad, John Verdery was the second headmaster in there for 34 years, began at age 26 and retired at age 62. An enormous time to be head of school, but he really, with the help of some faculty members, is the one that gave real life to that program of Year Abroad. And one of the things that he was proud about when we were a boarding school is his abilities to reach to cities all over the country. Karen has made her home in San Antonio. There were a number of families as I travel that when we were boarding actually came from San Antonio or from Los Angeles or from the Bronx. We're no longer a boarding school now, but we are still able to pull from urban areas. So we've had some students that live during the weekday in Worcester or in the Worcester area and go back to the Bronx for purposes of having time with their families. I'm very proud. I just have one of our first Latino graduates who works in the DA's office in Brooklyn. Deanna Rodriguez is coming in May to be our Founders Day speaker. and she and her brother were driven up the Wooster driveway in the 70s, and she saw all these trees and could not imagine what it would have been like. But she became a student, and she threatened to run away from home if her mother didn't allow her to come to Wooster. And she went off with her brother after Wooster to Harvard College, and but she's coming back. She's just somebody we're very proud of, and she's going to come back and be our Founders Day speaker this year.
So the school struck a very important chord with her.
Oh, she would. When I spoke with her last week, she said there are very few things that I would not do for Wooster School, and she's delighted to be reacquainted. She graduated in '78 and then on to college, and but she's been working full-time, and it's very interesting. Her boss is a very good friend of our head of school, our board president, Jim Mustick. When both of them went to Fordham Prep, we're on the boards there, but her boss is, so it's a very small world.
It certainly is, and needless to say, like any independent school, you've had a who's who of people who have attended the school over these 8+ decades. But it seems like, from what I'm hearing, is that some of the students that have graduated from Wooster that weren't famous stay with you the most, stay in your heart the most, that have the most, that have given the most back to the school in terms of emotional response and caring and that family feel that you get in Wooster School.
Last week we had we have a tradition of inviting back our last 3 graduating classes for a luncheon, Christmas luncheon, and we had 26 students that came back from their various colleges and universities to visit with the seniors and the faculty. And we asked one of them, who graduated from Brandeis, who's now actually got her screen card, who's an actress, to come back and talk, because theater is very important at Wooster. And Alex will be glad to tell you, we did the show Company last year, and Alex will tell you a little bit about a special actor that came out and worked with our cast.
Right. Yeah, yes. One of my high school friends is Raul Esparza, who graduated a couple of years before I did from my high school, and so I was able to get him to come to work with the cast, and it was a tremendous experience to have a 3-time Tony-nominated actor, one of his nominations in the role that one of our seniors was playing, one of our prefects was playing, and he worked with the students all afternoon, and then went out to dinner with the kid who was playing his role, and just sat with him and talked. And so it was we've mentioned the number of students, but I think people need to realize that our graduating classes, part of this community, our graduating classes are anywhere from 30 to 45 kids, and so it's a very, very tight-knit group, and it's a very very supportive community, which I think is great.
One of the things when we talk about diversity is what is the complexion of the Wooster population. And I was talking to our director of admissions about this, and Karen and I have talked about it. We have 354 students, and 67 of them are students of color, and they are represented by Hispanic, African American, Indian, Chinese, Native American, and that is not too dissimilar from the days when we were a boarding school. We had more Japanese and Chinese students at that point because we were pulling from urban areas where that was an opportunity. But the fact is, our commitment to diversity has remained very, very strong. And I would also say, I mean, it's not inexpensive to go to an independent school, and Wooster has always been committed to meeting the financial needs of our students. And I was pleased to know, in looking at our diversity, that roughly 34% of our students receive some sort of financial aid in the form of grants, so that our education can be affordable to many. So when Karen talks about the 8 different groups from NAIS, we're talking about it from an ethnic standpoint, we're talking about it from a racial standpoint, certainly in terms of the socioeconomic. It's all very important to us.
Now, we know that you reach out across ethnic and cultural lines within America, and then that's wonderful, because America is the great melting pot of the world. But do you often or ever get students that come from other countries?
We actually, I think this spring, are having a group of students from
Valencia.
from where the
Valencia.
Yeah, this is where we've had the some of our exchanges, and the last 2 years we've had students there, and they are bringing a group of students for 2 weeks, I think,
Yes.
just after spring break to our campus, so that we'll have a mini sort of immersion with them. So that will be a great opportunity.
And if I hadn't mentioned it before, my daughter Kimberly spent a year abroad in Valencia, so so I remember that very well. And her mom's house had the exchange student living there, and it was a great cultural experience. Although, as you can imagine, when you mix a family together, it's a little bit nerve-wracking at times.
Moments,
but
sure.
That could be called progressive soup.
I would say definitely so. Absolutely, very much a progressive soup bowl. But again, the students that you've had attend Wooster from across the country. Tell us more about some of them.
Well, I was in California last year and was in both Los Angeles and San Francisco, and I had a chance to visit with some of the graduates. And of course, some of those graduates were boarders, and they said it couldn't be possibly the same school. So part of my journey is to say, yes, we are a day school now, we were a boarding school, but we still represent the same values that you knew when you were a boarder. I was in San Antonio for a conference, and Karen and I sort of compared notes on San Antonio, and I had a chance to visit with a graduate who now works up in Austin, Texas, so I made a trip up there. So we've had a wonderful ability to connect with boarders that are no longer obviously seeing Wooster as a boarding school, and it takes some convincing because it was a very special place as an all-boys boarding school, and when we suddenly went co-educational when we were day, we certainly couldn't be the good old Wooster. I think we are the good old Wooster. We just happen to be a day school and not a boarding school.
So it was a pretty seamless transition then.
I think so. I mean, it took some time. I think John Verdery, the second head, who was there for 34 years, probably would have preferred to have it stay as a boarding school. But I know that one of my classmates at St. Albans left after 8th grade, and I never knew where he ended up. And when I was being interviewed, Neil Marcus, a local attorney and a graduate of the school, and certainly the hallmark Marcus Derry, said, "Oh, well, Ed Gunn, he was a classmate of mine here at Wooster, and then at Penn, and now he's up head of the East Asian Studies at Cornell." So it's a very small world, very small world.
Who do you see come back as graduates to revisit that were graduates 20, 30, 40, 50? I imagine you might get some people back at this point that maybe graduated even maybe 60 years ago, perhaps?
Well, every year we have this what is now grown into Founders Day, Grandparents Day.
Founders Day,
bring
yes.
them together. And this is what Deanna Rodriguez, she will be speaking to them on the Founders Grandparents Day on Friday. And then we bring back alumni for the alumni weekend. And this year we will be hosting 5-year reunion classes, and I host the 25th and 50th at my house for dinner and for lunch, and we're going to have a panel that will talk about Wooster today versus Wooster then. But it's extraordinary, and we're going to have a reunion in Boston next week, bringing back some of those who are in college now, and it's going to be a great opportunity.
Last year during that Founders Day weekend, I had an opportunity outside of the chapel of the school to run across an alumnus from the class of 1954. So he was celebrating his 55th reunion year, and he was one of those alums who is skeptical that Wooster is the same place that he left, and we started talking, and he was sort of I told him that I was the dean of the upper school and in charge of overseeing citizenship and the jobs program and all that sort of stuff, and he began to tell me stories about the things that they would do as boarders to try to get out of their jobs and things like that. I started telling him stories about the things that our current students do to do certain things, whatever, and at the end of that conversation he looked at me and he said, "No, I guess Wooster is the same place. There's just no one's sleeping here now." And I said, "Well, sometimes the faculty feel like it, but and the students do too, because it's a big commitment, and our students embrace it. Our students and families embrace it."
It seems like very definitely a life commitment for whatever period of time that you're a staff member or a student at Wooster.
Yeah.
What about? I've lost my train of thought. Tell us some more about the faculty, about the alumni that have come back. What can you tell us about your experiences with alumni?
Well, I think you'd be more appropriate to answer that question.
Well, Tracy Chapman, who is a graduate, has come back. She hasn't been back recently, but she graduated, and needless to say, has had a great career in the music industry. Neil Rudenstein, former president of Harvard, has come back many times. He actually dedicated the Verdery Library in 1992. One of the interesting things is that a number of people that have gone on from Wooster, both as students but also as teachers, have become heads of schools. I look at Wooster in some respects as a cradle of leadership. It's a place that has created a number of people that have gone on to be leaders in their own particular arenas, whether it be law. We had Cyrus Mary back last year for Founders Day. Cyrus has been an extraordinary, in fact, was a classmate or not too far away from Deanna Rodriguez, who's coming this year. Cyrus has done some extraordinary groundbreaking in terms of breaking some of the rules of corporate law, and has been an extraordinary speaker and representative for us. But we run into alums. Alums come back and they have this feeling as they drive up the driveway that it brings tears to their eyes. That they think about the days that they were here, and some haven't been back for 25 years. And when they come back, it all comes showering down on top of them.
That is wonderful.
There's a Wooster alum, Bill Street, who's one of our faculty members, and he gave a presentation last week to our upper school about the history of Wooster School. He's also the school historian or archivist, and he ended the presentation by saying, you know, the thing about Wooster is that it constantly has to change and change and change with the times, but at the same time remain the same. And I think that if you go back to alums that were all boys boarding alums and now are day students, they'll say that at the core the school remains the same.
I can sense that feeling of family that's transcended not the ages exactly, but certainly the decades. Let's get back onto diversity just for a moment and wrap up the show with that. Tell us more about the diversity.
Well, with diversity, we try to strive for open dialogue about diversity and also educate others that we are striving to be continuously a compassionate community. It's a work in progress. And we start from pre-K all the way through 12th grade, and we focus on diversity. On the lower school, we have a lower school representative coordinator, Carly Spaeth. We focus on the literature and different customs and traditions. In middle school, we have Surveying Rogers, and she does middle school assemblies, in which we have the students and their parents share their cultures with the students. And that would be India and China and Germany and also Hispanic countries. And then in the upper school, we focus mostly on education of leadership and also how to end discrimination. We actually dedicate an entire day to diversity.
We're going to have to wrap it up there, but I know we've got a lot more to talk about, and we'd love to have you back at a future date. This has been Progressive Soup. I'm David Stevenson, and I'll let you three introduce yourselves to the audience one more time.
I'm Karen Rolfini-Beckenstein.